Hey everybody, Spencer back again for my second video. First, before I start, I want to thank everybody that watched the first video or had positive comments. It's really awesome to be able to share my interests with people, and hopefully the end result is that we get some conversation going. So in my first video, what we looked at were the new comics from that week, and I talked about some of the things that a few of the comics that I really enjoyed from some great creators, both from Marvel and DC. For my second video, I thought we'd do something a little different. Instead of looking at some new comics, I thought I would do kind of a little retrospective review on an existing comic. And so for what I'm calling Spence's second look, today we'll be looking at the Dark Knight III, The Master Race. This is the third in a trilogy of books spearheaded by Frank Miller. The first was The Dark Knight Returns. It was a seminal book from the mid-'80s that really kind of flipped people's perception of Batman on its ears. I think before that, as far as the mainstream population went, people kind of thought it was the bam, pow, punch. And after reading Frank Miller's take on an old grizzled Batman stepping back under the cape and cowl, it really kind of shocked people and got them thinking about the character in a different way. The second part in the trilogy was The Dark Knight Strikes Again, and as fondly as The Dark Knight Returns is remembered, The Dark Knight Strikes Again probably not as well remembered or as fondly thought of as the original. It was definitely a different story, a lot bigger in scope. The art was a little bit more of a messy style from Frank Miller. It's not one that I think a lot of people necessarily loved, although I do remember thinking the first issue was really good. But The Dark Knight III is a really interesting capper to this trilogy. If you look at the first two parts of the Dark Knight trilogy by Frank Miller, they're very much, well, it's right in the title, very dark, not necessarily a super positive worldview in terms of how things are going and sort of how Frank Miller viewed society as a whole, let alone the character of Batman. So the Master Race is definitely an interesting addition to the story. In the story, we have some wonderful art by Andy Kubert and Klaus Janson, and also Brad Anderson, the colorist. They make a wonderful team. They try to, you can tell in different parts, that they try to recreate Frank Miller's style without being too slavish with it. But it's really the way that they did it, it's really well done. It's really cool. There's just some beautiful art that I'll show in a little bit. And Frank Miller also enlisted Brian Azzarello to do the actual scripting of the series. And it's really cool. There are times when you read it and you wonder, well, how much of this is Miller, how much of this is Azzarello? But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because it turns out so all the ingredients mixed together for a really tasty stew. So I'll start by showing the first issue. This is kind of cool. My wife and I were at C2E2 when the first issue, shortly after the first issue came out. So I actually had an artist, Delzo Corona, do a really cool sketch cover for us. This is a little bit Dark Knight, a little bit also Batman from Batman v Superman, which was obviously inspired by The Dark Knight Returns. But I always thought the first issue is great. There's kind of a big shock at the beginning that may or may not turn out to be true. But at the end of the first issue, you have Carrie Kelly, who is Robin in the Dark Knight series, captured. She was impersonating Batman, and she proclaims that Bruce Wayne was dead. It was definitely something that got people talking. And since Bruce Wayne in the Dark Knight books is older, certainly something that was possible. So now I'll just show off some other pieces just to kind of recap the plot a little bit of Dark Knight Master Race. Essentially what happens is it's in the future. Superman is kind of given up. Wonder Woman is off on an island of Amazons, and their daughter is supposed to be, I think, teens or early 20s maybe, but she's feeling very much sort of not human, not Kryptonian, not Amazonian, not really sure where she fits. So she decides to have the city of Kandor, which is a shrunken Kryptonian city, have that get enlarged so that the people there can live full lives. Sounds like a great plan. Sounds like something that Superman and all the other heroes would support. The only problem is that, unbeknownst to them, in this miniaturized body city, an extremist group of Kryptonians has taken over and slaughtered everyone else in the city. So when the city is enlarged and brought to full size, what they've really done is unleashed an army of extremist Kryptonians on the planet who basically are saying, we're going to subjugate the planet, we're going to take over, and there's really not a darn thing you can do about it. Unless you're Batman. So this is one of my favorite parts in the book. Might be a little hard to read, but they demand basically that the human race turn themselves over, and Batman gets on a screen and in just a total Batman way gives them the two-word answer of hell no. It's a really cool moment in a book that's really full of cool moments. When I first read the book, I read it issue to issue, and there were some parts that I really liked and some parts maybe that I wasn't as wild about. But I will say that, as with most books like this, if you read it all at once, it improves it dramatically. So I would definitely recommend experiencing it that way, whether that's buying all the issues together or finding a collected edition. I'm sure my friends at Westfield Comics would be able to help you with that. From there, I just want to show kind of some more cool things that I really enjoyed about this book. There's an awesome showdown between the Amazons and the Kryptonians in the 8th issue of the book. When you first think about it, you sort of think, well, the Kryptonians are super powered and they should be able to take care of business. But I think it was really clever of Azzarello and Frank Miller to realize that, well, there's magic that is involved in the Amazons world, and Kryptonians have two weaknesses: kryptonite and magic. So it was very exciting to see this go down, and it doesn't work out so well for the Kryptonians. So I just wanted to show off this really cool. This is a pretty cool full-page piece of art by the team of Andy Kubert and Klaus Janson and Brad Anderson. They really did a great job. It's sort of like the Valkyries coming down from the heavens as led by Wonder Woman and the Amazons. It's just a really striking image. There's just some great stuff in it. And I think my favorite thing about the third part of the Dark Knight trilogy is that it really ends on a hopeful note. Both for Superman, for Batman. I think sometimes if there's a knock that can be taken about The Dark Knight Returns, it's that Superman is viewed sort of less as a character and more as a statement, more as a representation of American interests. And so it was really cool to see in this volume especially that relationship get re-examined and really put in a more positive light. And also, as I mentioned in the first two parts of the trilogy, so Batman's worldview is not very positive. Certainly what Frank Miller has to say about society as a whole is not real positive. But I think maybe ironically, because we need hope right now, we need positivity, I was really happy to see that this series, without giving anything away, has a very, very positive ending. It just really, it was very surprising. I think most people that read a story called The Dark Knight, The Master Race were probably expecting kind of a dark, gloomy, pessimistic ending, and that's actually not what the creators had in mind at all. It's just a really, really well done book that I would definitely recommend reading all together in one sitting. Don't sort of read parts of it and then come back to it. I think the way that it's meant to be digested is all at one time. That's how I got the most power out of it. And I think one of my favorite things of the whole series is this recreation. This is, of course, the classic pose from Dark Knight Returns is done by Frank Miller. But this time it's it's repurposed, and it's Bruce and Carrie, and they're sort of jumping into action with the lightning, and he says it's going to be a better life. And that is really awesome, because the first book ends with him saying that this life is going to be good enough. And it's awesome to see that through a set of circumstances in the book, Bruce maybe has a new attitude on life, and maybe a new lease on life too. And he's looking to maybe correct some of the way that he did some things. So I think there's something really inspiring about that. There's something really positive about it. And I think it's worth your time. It's worth your time. So definitely check it out, whether that's getting it from the local comic book store or trying to find it from the library. I would definitely recommend it. It's a nice return to form for the series. Whether or not it continues after this trilogy, I don't know, but to me, it really struck as the perfect ending. So a great work by a fantastic creative team with a few legends on that creative team, actually. Check it out. The Dark Knight, The Master Race. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.